A Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri was first published in 1999. It's a collection of 9 short stories and was released when the author was 32 years old. The book was massively successful, winning the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and going on to sell millions of copies worldwide. The individual stories in this collection are brief, ranging from 10 to 30 pages in length, and the writing is precise and clear throughout, making it an easy and accessible read. But I hesitate to call it simple, as there's a depth and complexity to the work that invites close scrutiny and interpretation. The sequencing of the 9 stories is especially strong and contributes to the reading experience because there's always a fresh perspective with each new selection. Some of the tales are told with a nostalgic longing, while others are told in the present and have an immediacy to their events. 2 in particular are delivered almost like fables, and the protagonists range in age from young children to the newly married to the elderly. The narratives are all concerned, in one way or another, with issues of identity. There's always a relationship at the heart of each story, and then there's this malady or illness that's threatening the health of that relationship. Each selection has its own unique set of motifs, fills out its world with distinct details, and has its own individual texture. Some deal with secrets and guilt, while others consider language, love, and faith. The narrative predicaments do often emerge out of the tension between Indian and American values, with Calcutta and Boston reoccurring most often as settings. Yet despite that specificity, there is something universal in this cycle of stories. Lahiri's writing is sweeping in its humanity, with refreshing variety, strong symbols, and themes that will resonate with all readers, not just those of a similar background or experience to its characters. It's a book about our fractures in relationships, our relationships with other people, but also our relationships to our sense of place, our sense of belonging, and our sense of ourselves.
The first time I read this book, it was from this Mariner Books trade paperback edition. It's actually the true first edition of the collection. The title was released as a paperback original before winning the Pulitzer Prize and exploding in popularity. It was in its 6th printing by the time they finally released a hardcover edition, and it, along with the subsequent editions of the paperback, advertised the prize on the cover. This copy features an image of lighted candles in front of an orange mosaic with decorated handprints behind. It has gold trim and is a great design that suggests fragmentation. While desirable to collectors as a true first edition, ultimately it is still a mass-market paperback. The acid in the paper and the cheap binding will continue to degrade. The pages are actually already turning color on me. I recall really enjoying it when I first read it 20 years ago, so when the Folio Society announced that it would be part of a recent collection and I could upgrade to a deluxe illustrated hardcover copy of the book, I decided to pull the trigger. So let's do this. And here we have Interpreter of Maladies from the Folio Society, and it is a beauty. This version was released in 2023. It's presented in an orange paper slipcase with a contrasting blue root design. Within this design are icons that represent each story, the candle from A Temporary Matter, or the Jesus snow globe from This Blessed House. The book itself is quarterbound in blue cloth with a wraparound image on textured paper sides. The image is of vibrant lotus flowers in reds and oranges, with light blue stems that end appropriately in roots, as so many of the stories here are about the thinning of cultural roots. On the spine, the author and publisher name are recessed in silver foil, while the title is in orange. The binding is appropriately finished with orange head and tail bands. When we crack the book open, we're met by plain orange end papers in a medium stock. The book is printed in Germany on Abbey wove paper, which is smooth and comes in at a slight cream color according to my color swatches. The sewn binding here is excellent, without the excess of glue that Folio used in its books from the mid-2000s. If we bring back the Mariner edition for a brief side-by-side, we can see that they're very close to the same size, with the Folio version coming in at a centimeter more in the height, which translates to just half a centimeter on the text block itself. The font size is slightly larger in the Folio version, and the better quality paper improves the contrast and the clarity of the printing. The preface is by Domenico Starnone, an Italian author and journalist. He discusses his first encounter with the book, and then considers its structure. He finishes his 4 pages by looking at language. He points out the linguistic unease of the characters and discusses Lahiri's own transition into writing in Italian rather than English, calling it an act of cultural politics. After writing her first 4 books in English, Jhumpa Lahiri now only writes in Italian, but continues to translate the work of others, including Starnone. This preface was written in 2019 and is not exclusive to this folio edition, as I've also seen it included in recent paperback editions. The interior artwork, like the cover and the slipcase art, is by Shreya Gupta. She's an illustrator and book designer who's worked with other publishers. Her work is completely digital and features bold colors and graphic designs. The artwork here is presented on thick, smooth matte paper, and the images all land within the page range of the individual stories they correspond to. Let's take a detailed look at that artwork now. The first illustration is from the first short story, A Temporary Matter, and features so many precise details from the narrative. Shukumar and his wife Shobha sit on the front porch in the evening while their suburban neighborhood's power is out. They're illuminated by the candles from their dinner, and we can see that there's still snow on the ground. Above them, and partially obscuring their faces, is the source of the particular malady that ails them, an ultrasound image from the child they recently lost before birth. The second illustration is based on the second story, When Mr. Perzada Came to Dine, which is narrated by Lilia, who is 10 years old, and it takes place on Halloween. Here, the dapper Mr. Perzada presents her with chocolate-covered mints. She's dressed like a witch for trick-or-treating, and behind her is their first jack-o'-lantern, which sports an astonished face due to the frequent house guests slipping up while helping carve it. Above that, we see the source of his malady, represented by the watch that Mr. Perzada brings out and sets upon napkins as he watches the nightly news with Lilia's parents. It is set to Dhaka time, and in its face the fire echoes the violence which engulfs his home. The third piece is inspired by the eponymous story. A monkey looks down on the Dawes family, who are comforting young Bobby after he was attacked by the animals. Details like the sun visor and Mrs. Dawes' outfit are evidence of a careful reading, but the thematic elements are even more powerful in this illustration. Here is Mr. Kapari, the tour guide, and at his feet is the tour book. His face is obscured by the crumbling statue, which initially appears to be an erotic frieze like those that they were visiting. But the book at the male's foot, and the similarities between the female figure and Mrs. Dawes, make it clear that the crack is symbolic of Mr. Kapari's misinterpretation of the word romantic. The fourth image is from the fifth story, Sexy. In her apartment bedroom in Boston, protagonist Miranda tries on the dress she buys, but will never wear, as she contemplates her reflection in the mirror. Her room is lit in red light, which is appropriate given the adulterous relationship she's currently having with a married man named Dev. He obscures her face, looking all dashing, like a South Asian Lando Calrissian. His gesture recalls his whisper in the Maporium, and the full color palette used in his depiction helps the top section contrast against the bottom section of the image, as this relationship is the malady that afflicts Miranda's sense of identity. The next illustration is from the sixth selection, Mrs. Sen's. At the bottom, we see young Elliot sitting in a chair eating a popsicle, while Mrs. Sen prepares food on the spread newspaper with her chopping blade. She handles a fish, which is something she loves to eat. One afternoon, a fish market calls to let her know about a surprise delivery of halibut they just received, and Mrs. Sen, who's uncomfortable behind the wheel of a car and has not yet earned her driver's license, decides to drive to the market anyway. She and Elliot are in a small but humiliating accident, which is represented by the shattered image of the car above them. Transportation, and the inability to move great distances, is Mrs. Sen's malady, and it restricts her sense of self in this story, as evident by her obscured face in this piece. The sixth image is from the seventh story called This Blessed House. It depicts a scene from the housewarming party that Sanjeev and Twinkle host after buying their first home. Purple is used throughout the background, and we note the diversity of the guests, who are mostly made up of Sanjeev's friends and colleagues. They drink champagne and snack and chat and enjoy each other's company. This is Twinkle, who makes a positive impression on nearly everyone she interacts with. Here is Sanjeev, and we can see enough of him to know that he's slouching. He's covered up by the silver statue of Jesus, one of the many Christian relics the Hindu couple find hidden throughout their home as they clean and renovate. Sanjeev is always looking to change and cover up the things around him, rather than accepting them and moving around them. The seventh image is from the ninth story, The Third and Final Continent. The unnamed narrator, who's just starting out his life in America in the late 1960s, sits on a piano bench next to his landlady, Mrs. Croft. All of the details from the descriptions are precisely included here, from the spider plant to Mrs. Croft's outfit to the transistor radio and telephone beside her. She is over 100 years old and is fascinated by the recent moon landing. She has her boarder shout out "Splendid" in response to the landing, and they repeat this routine often as Mrs. Croft is wrestling with dementia. The moon landing details almost explode from his mouth, covering his face, as he wrestles with distance from the familiar and exploring foreign terrain. I really like this edition of Interpreter of Maladies. I love when I can sense a profound understanding of the book in the illustrator's attention to the textual details, and that is certainly true here. Because this is a collection of short stories, the artwork is even more vital as it gives each of the selections a distinct anchor, while also serving to provide an interpretive take on their symbolism. The only knock against it, beyond the recycled preface rather than a fresh and unique introduction, is that there are only illustrations for 7 of the 9 short stories, which is unfortunate. Beyond that, this Folio Society edition boasts everything else I look for in a deluxe version of a book. An illustrated slipcase, a cohesive design, and a great build and binding that will hold up to multiple readings. It's currently available on Folio Society's website, so it isn't hard to get, and while it is a touch pricey, it certainly delivers on the quality, and I'm pleased to add it to my bookshelf. As always, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for future videos. When it comes to the stories you love, it's always worth upgrading your books.